faintly in the dim light. Curious, I reached out to open it, but the handle wouldn't turn. It was locked. When I asked the landlord about it the next day, he was curt. "That room is off limits," he said, his voice leaving no room for argument. "It's not part of the rental agreement. Just leave it alone." His response only fueled my curiosity. What could possibly be in that room? I couldn't stop thinking about it. Every time I went down to the basement, my eyes would drift toward the door, my mind spinning with possibilities. What was he hiding? One evening, while cleaning up after dinner, I found the key. It was tucked away in the back of a kitchen drawer, almost as if someone had hidden it there. The moment I saw it, I knew what it was for. The temptation was too strong to resist. My heart raced as I took the key down to the basement, the old stairs creaking underfoot. I hesitated in front of the door, the key cold in my hand. Part of me knew I should leave it alone, respect the landlord's wishes. But my curiosity won out in the end. I slid the key into the lock and turned it. The door opened with a soft click, revealing a room that was unlike anything else in the house. It was pristine, a stark contrast to the rest of the dusty basement. The air was cool and still, as if the room had been sealed off from the world for years. Everything was meticulously arranged: a small table with a chair, shelves lined with old books and trinkets, and a large cabinet against the far wall. But what caught my attention were the photographs. They were everywhere, covering the walls, the shelves, even the floor. Hundreds of them, all in black and white, neatly framed and arranged in rows, and they were all of me. A shiver ran down my spine as I stepped closer, my eyes scanning the images. They were taken from various angles: me walking in the garden, sitting on the porch, reading in the living room. Some were recent, others looked like they had been taken the moment I arrived. The more I looked, the more unsettled I became. Who had taken these? How had I not noticed someone watching me? My breath quickened as I realized that some of the photos were from inside the house. There were pictures of me cooking in the kitchen, lounging in the living room, even sitting at the desk in the study. The angles were strange, almost voyeuristic, as if the photographer had been hiding in the shadows, waiting for the perfect moment to capture me. I couldn't bear it any longer. I backed out of the room, slamming the door shut behind me. My hands were shaking as I locked it and hurried back upstairs, the key heavy in my pocket. I shoved it back into the drawer where I had found it, as if returning it to its hiding place could somehow erase what I had seen. That night I barely slept. Every creak of the house, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I kept expecting to hear footsteps in the hallway, the sound of someone sneaking through the house. But the night passed in silence, the house as still as ever. The next morning I tried to convince myself that it had all been a mistake, a misunderstanding. Perhaps the photos had been left by a previous tenant, someone who had an unusual hobby. Maybe the landlord didn't even know about them. But deep down I knew that wasn't true. When I finally worked up the courage to return to the basement, the door to the locked room was just as I had left it. I stood there for a long moment, my hand on the key, debating whether or not to go back inside. Part of me wanted to leave it alone, to pretend I had never found it, but I had to know. I opened the door, and my breath caught in my throat. The room was exactly the same, except for one horrifying detail. The photographs had been replaced. The new ones were in color, the images sharp and clear. And they were all of me, asleep in my bed. My heart pounded in my chest as I looked at the photos, each one taken from a different angle, as if someone had been standing right next to me while I slept. The sheets were the same, the position of my body identical to how I remembered lying the night before. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Someone had been in my room while I slept. I stumbled back, nearly tripping over the threshold as I fled the room. The key slipped from my fingers, clattering to the floor, but I didn't care. I bolted up the stairs, my mind racing with fear. I had to get out of there. Within the hour, I had packed my things and was in my car, speeding away from the house as fast as I could. I didn't tell the landlord why I was leaving early, didn't even bother to ask for a refund. All I knew was that I couldn't stay there another night. As I drove away, I glanced in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see someone standing in the window, watching me leave. But the house remained still and silent, its secrets hidden behind its quaint exterior. I never found out who took those photos or why they were there. But the memory of that room and the feeling of being watched stayed with me long after I left. I learned a valuable lesson that some doors are better left locked. Story 2. At work, everything was routine. I'd been with the company for a few years, settling into the predictable rhythm of my daily tasks. My desk, nestled in a quiet corner of the office, had become a second home, with photos of family and a few plants to liven up the space. I'd never had any reason to feel uneasy there until the notes started appearing. It was a Monday morning when I found the first one. I arrived at my desk, set my coffee down, and opened my drawer to grab a pen. Inside was a small folded piece of paper. My name was scrawled on the front in neat handwriting. At first I thought it was a harmless joke, maybe a leftover from a team-building exercise I'd forgotten about. But as I unfolded the note, a chill ran down my spine. The message inside was brief but unsettling. "I know what you did last summer." My mind raced. What could this mean? I hadn't done anything out of the ordinary the previous summer, no secrets, no scandals. Just a normal vacation with friends. I laughed it off, chalking it up to a prank by a coworker with a strange sense of humor. I crumpled up the note and tossed it in the trash, determined to forget about it. But the notes kept coming. Every few days I'd find a new one waiting for me. They appeared in my desk drawer, slipped between papers, or even tucked under my keyboard. Each note was more personal, containing details that no one else should know. My childhood fears, my anxieties, even things I had never spoken aloud to anyone. The handwriting was always the same, perfectly neat, with a slight slant that was unfamiliar to me. The messages, however, were anything but neat. They hinted at my insecurities, my deepest fears, and always ended with a vague but unsettling statement, like "I'm closer than you think" or "you can't hide from me." By the third note, I started to grow paranoid. I began looking around the office, trying to catch a glimpse of someone watching me or sneaking away from my desk, but nothing seemed out of the ordinary. Everyone went about their business as usual, oblivious to the turmoil churning inside me. I confided in a close friend at work, Sarah, hoping she might have some insight. She listened intently, her brow furrowed in concern. "Are you sure it's not just someone playing a prank on you?" she asked, trying to reassure me. But the look in her eyes told me she was just as unnerved as I was. "Maybe you should talk to HR," she suggested. So I did. I went to HR, feeling a bit foolish but needing to do something to regain control over the situation. The HR manager, a stern woman named Mrs. Dempsey, listened to my concerns with a stony expression. She assured me that they would look into it and asked if I had any idea who might be responsible. But I didn't. I had no enemies at work, no one who would go to such lengths to unnerve me. Days passed after my meeting with HR, and I heard nothing. No updates, no explanations. I began to feel like I was losing my grip on reality. Every time I opened my desk drawer, my heart would race, expecting another note. But for a while there were none. Just as I started to convince myself that it was over, that maybe HR had quietly dealt with the issue, the notes returned. This time they were worse. The messages were no longer just cryptic, they were disturbing. One note simply read, "I know you're scared," and another, "You're not safe here." The last straw came one Friday afternoon. It had been a long week, and I was exhausted. As I sat at my desk trying to focus on finishing a report, I opened my drawer to grab a file and found another note. My breath caught in my throat as I read it. "I'm watching you right now." The words sent a jolt of fear through me. I felt a sudden, intense pressure on my chest, like a weight pressing down. My hands trembled as I clutched the note, my mind racing. The room felt suffocating, and the air was thick with tension. I felt it, a gaze on me, heavy and invasive. My heart pounded in my chest as I slowly turned around, expecting to find someone standing there, staring at me. But the office was empty. The cubicles were deserted, the usual hum of conversations and ringing phones replaced by an eerie silence. It was late in the afternoon, and most of my colleagues had already left for the weekend. The lights overhead flickered slightly, casting long shadows across the room. I stood up, my legs shaky, and walked around my desk, scanning every corner of the office. I checked behind partitions, peered into empty conference rooms, even looked out the windows, but there was no one. The feeling of being watched lingered, gnawing at me, but I couldn't find a single soul. My rational mind told me it was just my imagination, fueled by the paranoia the notes had stirred up. But a deeper, more primal part of me knew better. Unable to shake the fear, I gathered my things and left the office in a hurry. I didn't look back, afraid of what I might see or not see if I did. That weekend, I barely slept, haunted by the thought that someone out there knew me, knew my fears, and was toying with me. When Monday came, I dreaded returning to work. When I arrived, my desk was just as I had left it. I hesitated before opening the drawer, my heart pounding in my chest. But there was no new note, no sign that anything had been disturbed. For a brief moment, I felt a surge of relief until I noticed something else. The note from Friday was gone. The one that had said, "I'm watching you right now," I had left it in the drawer. But now it was missing. Someone had taken it. A cold dread settled in the pit of my stomach. Whoever was doing this was closer than I had ever imagined. I went back to HR, demanding answers, but Mrs. Dempsey seemed more annoyed than concerned. "We've checked the security footage," she said curtly. "No one has been tampering with your desk. Are you sure you didn't misplace the notes yourself?" Her words stung, and I left the office feeling more alone than ever. The notes had stopped, but the fear remained. I could no longer concentrate at work, always feeling on edge, always looking over my shoulder. I never found out who was behind the notes or how they knew such intimate details about my life, but the experience left a scar, a lingering sense of unease that I could never quite shake. Even now, I sometimes catch myself glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see someone standing there, watching me from the shadows. Story 3. The first time the house alarm went off in the middle of the night, I dismissed it as a glitch. I had just moved into the old house a few weeks ago, and though the previous owner assured me that everything was in working order, I figured the alarm system was just showing its age. Groggy and half asleep, I shuffled downstairs to disarm the alarm, my heart pounding in my chest from the sudden jolt. I checked every window and door, making sure they were all locked and secure. Everything seemed fine, so I chalked it up to a technical error and went back to bed. But it didn't stop there. The alarm continued to go off night after night, always at the same time, 2:47 a.m. Every time it happened, I would get up, go through the house, and find nothing out of place. I even called the alarm company, and they sent a technician to inspect the system. He found no issues, no signs of tampering or malfunction. Yet the alarm persisted, as if it had a mind of its own. One night, About a week after the alarm first started acting up, I found myself in the basement, organizing some old boxes left behind by the previous owner. I lost track of time, sorting through dusty memorabilia, when I heard the sound of someone moving around upstairs. The soft creak of floorboards, the faint shuffle of footsteps. My heart skipped a beat, and I froze, listening intently. The footsteps were deliberate, not like the random settling of an old house, but the measured tread of someone walking through the rooms. I quickly grabbed my phone and dialed 911, whispering to the operator that there was someone in my house. She told me to stay on the line and remain quiet until the police arrived. I could still hear the footsteps overhead, moving from the kitchen to the living room, then toward the staircase. My mind raced as I crouched behind a stack of boxes, praying that whoever was upstairs wouldn't come down to the basement. The minutes dragged on like hours, the tension in the air so thick it was almost suffocating. Finally, I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside, followed by the slamming of doors. The police were here. Relief washed over me, but the footsteps continued, undisturbed by the arrival of the authorities. I stayed hidden until I heard the officers calling out, announcing their presence. Only then did I emerge from the basement, my hands trembling as I climbed the stairs to meet them. The officers searched the entire house, room by room, but they found nothing. No signs of forced entry, no evidence that anyone had been inside. They checked the windows and doors just as I had, and everything was secure. They even reviewed the security footage from the cameras I had installed around the house. But the footage showed nothing, no one entering or leaving, no shadowy figures creeping through the halls. It was as if the sounds I had heard were all in my head. But I knew they weren't. I had heard those footsteps, felt the presence of someone or something moving through my home. The officers tried to reassure me, suggesting that perhaps it was just the house settling, or maybe an animal outside that I had mistaken for an intruder. But I could see the doubt in their eyes. They thought I was overreacting, that maybe I was just spooked from living alone in an unfamiliar place. After the police left, I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself that maybe they were right. Maybe I was just hearing things. But deep down, I knew better. There was something wrong with the house, something I couldn't explain. The alarm kept going off, always at 2:47 a.m., and every time it did, I felt that same cold dread wash over me. A few nights later, I decided to stay up and watch the security footage in real time, determined to catch whatever was triggering the alarm. I sat in front of the monitor, the house dark and silent around me, the only light coming from the screen. 2:47 a.m. came and went, and for a moment I thought maybe the disturbances had stopped. But then, the alarm blared, shattering the silence. I quickly rewound the footage, my eyes scanning the screen for any sign of movement. There was nothing, no intruder, no animal, nothing that could have set off the alarm. But as I listened closely, I heard something that sent a chill down my spine. Faint, almost imperceptible, there were footsteps, muffled, distant, but unmistakably human. They were there, on the recording, yet when I played it back for anyone else, they heard nothing. It was as if the sounds were meant for me alone. The days that followed were a blur of anxiety and sleepless nights. I became obsessed with the alarm and the footsteps, spending hours watching the footage, trying to catch even the smallest anomaly. But no matter how many times I watched, the result was always the same, nothing visible. Only those faint, ghostly footsteps echoing through the house. I started to avoid going to bed, dreading the moment when the alarm would go off again. I'd lie awake, listening, waiting for the footsteps to start. Sometimes, I thought I could hear whispers too, just on the edge of hearing, as if someone were trying to speak to me from the other side of the walls. But the words were always just out of reach, leaving me with nothing but a growing sense of unease. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. I packed a bag and left the house, staying with a friend while I tried to figure out what to do. I couldn't live like that, constantly on edge, feeling like I was being watched, haunted by something I couldn't see. I called in another technician, another round of police, but nothing helped. The alarm continued to malfunction, the footsteps continued to echo in the recordings, and I knew that whatever was in the house, it wasn't going to leave me alone. The final night I spent in that house, the alarm went off at 2:47 a.m. as usual. But this time, when I listened to the recording, the footsteps were louder, clearer, as if they were right beside me. And this time I heard something else, too, a low, guttural whisper. Just one word, but it was enough to send me fleeing into the night. Leave. Story 4. It had been an ordinary night out with friends, dinner at our favorite restaurant followed by drinks at a local bar. The laughter, the stories, the easy camaraderie, all of it had made the evening one of those perfect nights that left you smiling long after it was over. But that happiness shattered the moment I reached for my wallet the next morning and found it missing. At first I thought I had simply misplaced it. I retraced my steps, searching through my apartment, checking every pocket, every corner, every possible place it could have fallen. I even called the restaurant and the bar, hoping that someone had found it and turned it in. But it was nowhere to be found. As the day wore on, the sinking realization that my wallet was gone for good settled in. I had no choice but to report it stolen. I canceled my credit cards, filed a police report, and began the tedious process of replacing my ID and other important documents. The inconvenience was bad enough, but what truly bothered me was the thought of someone out there having access to my personal information, someone who could be using it for who knows what purpose. A few days later, as I was heading out for work, I noticed an envelope slipped under my front door. It was unmarked, no return address, just a plain white envelope with my name scrawled across the front in messy handwriting. Puzzled, I picked it up and opened it. Inside was my wallet. For a moment, relief washed over me until I opened it and saw that it had been emptied of all its contents. My credit cards, ID, cash, everything was gone, except for a single slip of paper tucked into one of the card slots. I pulled it out, and my heart skipped a beat as I read the message written on it in large, bold letters, "I know where you live." A cold shiver ran down my spine, and my hand shook as I held the note. The words were simple but filled with a menacing certainty that made my blood run cold. Someone had gone through the trouble of stealing my wallet, removing all its contents, and then returning it to me with this chilling message. Whoever it was, they knew where I lived. They had been to my home, close enough to slip the envelope under my door without me noticing. Fear gripped me as I stared at the note, my mind racing with questions. Who had done this? Why would they return the wallet? What did they want? But no matter how hard I tried to piece it together, I couldn't make sense of it. All I knew was that I was no longer safe in my own home. The next few days were a blur of paranoia and anxiety. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that someone was lurking in the shadows, waiting for the right moment to strike. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves outside made my heart pound. I barely slept, jumping at every little sound, convinced that someone was trying to break in. I decided to take action. The first thing I did was change the locks on my door. The idea that someone might have a key to my apartment filled me with dread, so I had a locksmith come out immediately. I watched as he installed the new locks, double-checking to make sure everything was secure, but even that didn't fully ease my fears. Next, I moved some of my belongings to a friend's place. I didn't have the time or resources to relocate entirely, but I thought if I could make it look like I wasn't staying there full-time, it might deter whoever was watching me. I packed up some clothes, important documents, and anything of value, and spent a few nights crashing on my friend's couch. But the fear followed me. I couldn't escape the feeling that I was being watched, even when I was away from home. I also installed a security system with cameras, motion detectors, and alarms. The company assured me that my apartment was now one of the safest in the city, but I couldn't shake the feeling of unease. Every time I entered my apartment, I checked the footage from the cameras, hoping to catch a glimpse of whoever had left that note. But nothing ever showed up. It was as if the person had simply vanished, leaving me in a state of perpetual dread. The days turned into weeks, and gradually the intensity of my fear began to subside, though it never completely disappeared. I started to regain some sense of normalcy, though I remained hyper-vigilant. I avoided going out late at night, kept my curtains drawn, and checked the locks multiple times before going to bed. But the memory of that note haunted me, a constant reminder that someone out there had invaded my life in the most personal way possible. I became obsessed with trying to figure out who had done it. I went over every detail of that night out with friends, trying to remember if anyone had been acting strangely or if I had seen anyone following me. But nothing stood out. I even considered the possibility that it was some kind of sick joke, but the note didn't feel like a prank, it felt like a threat, one that I couldn't ignore. Months passed, and while the fear no longer consumed me, it had left its mark. I was more cautious, more aware of my surroundings, and less trusting of others. The feeling of being watched never completely left me, lurking in the back of my mind like a shadow. I knew I had to move on, but part of me would always be looking over my shoulder, wondering if that anonymous threat would ever come to pass. In the end, I never found out who took my wallet or why they returned it with that ominous note. The mystery remained unsolved, a lingering question with no answer. But the experience changed me. It made me realize how vulnerable we can be, how easily our sense of security can be shattered by a single, anonymous act. And it taught me to be more careful, to never take my safety for granted, because once you've been marked, the fear of what might happen next never truly goes away. Story 5. The first text came on an ordinary Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk finishing up some emails when my phone buzzed. I glanced at the screen and saw a message from an unknown number. I almost ignored it, thinking it was another spam message, but something made me pause. I opened it, expecting the usual nonsense, but what I read made my skin crawl. "Nice blue shirt today. You look good in that color." I frowned, looking down at my blue shirt. It wasn't an unusual outfit choice, and it could have been a coincidence, but something about the message felt off. How did this person know what I was wearing? I looked around the office, trying to spot anyone acting suspicious, but everyone was engrossed in their work. I dismissed it as a weird prank and went back to my tasks. But the messages didn't stop. Over the next few days, more texts came in, each one more unsettling than the last. They detailed my routines, places I'd been, and even conversations I'd had. One morning I received a text that read, "Did you enjoy your coffee at the corner cafe? The barista gave you an extra shot. Didn't she? I had indeed stopped at the cafe that morning, and the barista had given me an extra shot of espresso." My heart raced as I reread the message. How did they know that? I hadn't told anyone. At first, I tried to brush it off as a prank. Maybe a friend was playing a joke on me, or perhaps it was someone in the office who'd seen me at the cafe. But as the days passed, the messages grew more specific, more personal. They started predicting things that would happen to me, minor accidents, small misfortunes that, while not life-threatening, were certainly unsettling. One day, as I was leaving for work, I received a text, "Be careful on your way out. You might trip on the last step." I paused at the door, my hand hovering over the handle. The last step of the staircase had always been a bit tricky, but I'd never tripped on it before. I shook my head, telling myself I was being paranoid. But as I descended the stairs, I hesitated at the last step, and in my hesitation I lost my balance. I stumbled, catching myself on the banister just in time. My heart pounded in my chest as I reached the bottom, the words of the text echoing in my mind. I decided to take action. I tried tracing the number, but every attempt led to a dead end. It was as if the number didn't exist, a ghost in the system. I reported the text to the police, but without any real threat, they couldn't do much. They suggested I change my number, but I hesitated. Part of me wanted to know who was behind this. The idea that someone was watching me, knowing so much about my life, was terrifying, but I also needed answers. The text continued, each one a reminder that someone was out there, observing me. You're running late today. Maybe skip the coffee and catch the earlier train. The text predicted delays, weather changes, and even the arrival of a package I hadn't been expecting. I started feeling like I was losing my grip on reality. How could someone know so much? How could they predict these things with such accuracy? I began to withdraw, avoiding my usual routines, hoping to throw off whoever was watching me. I changed my commute, stopped going to my favorite spots, even started taking different routes home. But the texts followed me, commenting on my new routines, almost as if they were taunting me for trying to escape. Nice try with a detour, but I still see you. Sleep became elusive. Every time my phone buzzed, my heart would race, and I'd dread what I might read. The constant anxiety wore me down, and I found myself jumping at shadows, seeing threats where there were none. I even considered leaving town for a while, but I couldn't shake the feeling that whoever was sending the text would still find me, no matter where I went. Then, just as abruptly as they had started, the texts stopped. I noticed it one day when I realized that I hadn't received a message in over 24 hours. At first, I felt a sense of relief, thinking that maybe finally it was over. But the relief was short-lived, replaced by a gnawing sense of unease. Why had they stopped? Had they moved on to someone else, or was this part of some larger plan? The days turned into weeks, and still there were no more texts. I began to relax, though the memory of those weeks of torment lingered. The silence, however, was almost worse than the texts themselves. I found myself constantly on edge, waiting for the next message, the next sign that someone was still watching, but nothing came. As the weeks passed, I tried to return to my normal life, but the knowledge that someone had known so much about me, had predicted so many of my movements, weighed heavily on me. I became more cautious, more guarded, not just with my routines, but with the people around me. The experience had shaken me to my core, leaving a scar that time would never fully heal. One night, months later, I was sitting alone in my apartment, the memory of the texts a distant, but ever-present, shadow in my mind. My phone buzzed on the table, and I froze, my breath catching in my throat. I stared at the screen, the familiar anxiety flooding back in an instant. But when I picked it up, it was just a notification from a friend, nothing more. I let out a shaky breath, trying to calm my racing heart. But as I set the phone down, a single thought lingered, chilling me to the bone. Somewhere out there, someone still knew too much about me. Story 6. When I first moved into my new neighborhood, I was thrilled. The tree-lined streets, well-kept lawns, and friendly faces made it feel like the perfect place to start fresh. My small house at the end of the cul-de-sac felt cozy and inviting, and I quickly settled into a comfortable routine. The neighbors were welcoming, especially the man living next door. He introduced himself as Alan, a middle-aged man with a warm smile and a seemingly genuine interest in helping me get acclimated to the area. At first, I appreciated Alan's friendliness. He offered to help with my yard work, invited me over for coffee, and provided recommendations for local services. It was nice to have someone so willing to lend a hand, especially when you're new to a place. We'd chat occasionally over the fence, and he always seemed eager to learn more about me, where I worked, my hobbies, and even my family background. I found his interest a bit excessive, but I dismissed it as harmless neighborly curiosity. However, as the weeks passed, Alan's behavior began to shift from friendly to unsettling. He started asking increasingly personal questions. He wanted to know the details of my work schedule, the names of my friends, and even why I wasn't dating anyone. His questions were intrusive, and I began to feel uncomfortable with how much he wanted to know about my life. There was something about the way he asked, an intensity in his eyes that made me uneasy. I tried to distance myself, making excuses when he invited me over or tried to engage in long conversations, but Alan was persistent. He always seemed to be outside when I left for work or returned home, waving and calling out to me as if he were watching for my comings and goings. The feeling that he was always there, always watching, became harder to shake. Then one day I found something that made my blood run cold. It was a Sunday morning, and I was tidying up my front porch, arranging the flower pots that lined the steps. As I bent down to move one of the pots, something metallic caught my eye. Hidden behind the leaves was a small black object. I picked it up, and my heart skipped a beat when I realized what it was: a camera. A tiny, discreet camera, positioned perfectly to capture everything happening at my front door. My hands trembled as I held the camera, a sickening feeling of violation washing over me. Someone had been watching me, recording my every move as I entered and left my home. The sense of safety I had once felt in my own space was shattered in an instant. I didn't want to believe it, but the more I thought about it, the more it made sense. Alan's odd behavior, his obsession with my routine, it all pointed to him. But why? What was he hoping to gain by invading my privacy like this? The questions swirled in my mind, each one more disturbing than the last. With a deep breath, I decided I couldn't ignore it. I needed answers. I marched over to Alan's house, camera in hand, and knocked on the door. When he opened it, his expression shifted from surprise to something else, something I couldn't quite place. "I found this," I said, holding up the camera. It was hidden behind a flower pot on my porch. "Care to explain?" For a moment, Alan's face was blank, as if he was processing the situation. Then, he let out a nervous laugh. "Oh, that? It's just for security purposes. You can never be too careful these days, right?" I stared at him, disbelief and anger boiling inside me. "Security purposes? You've been spying on me? That's not normal, Alan. That's not okay." Alan's smile faltered, and his eyes took on a pleading look. "I didn't mean to upset you. I was just trying to look out for you. You're new here, and I thought it would be good to keep an eye on things. You know, in case anything happened." His words did little to ease my anger. If anything, they only made me feel more uneasy. This wasn't about security, this was about control. He wanted to know everything about me, to monitor my every move, and that was something I couldn't tolerate. "I'm not comfortable with this," I said firmly. "You had no right to put a camera on my property without my consent. I want you to remove any other cameras you might have placed and leave me alone. Do you understand?" Alan's face darkened, and for a split second, I saw a flicker of something cold in his eyes. But then he nodded, his expression softening back into that friendly, almost apologetic demeanor. "Of course, I'm sorry. I'll remove the camera. It won't happen again." I didn't trust him. There was something about his quick change in demeanor that felt disingenuous, like he was just telling me what I wanted to hear. But I had made my point, and I hoped that would be the end of it. Over the next few days, I kept a close eye on my surroundings, wary of any further invasions of my privacy. Alan stayed out of sight, and I didn't see him lurking around as he used to. But the sense of unease didn't fade. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, even when there was no one around. That's when I decided it was time to move. The thought of staying in a place where someone had violated my privacy so blatantly was too much to bear. I found a new apartment across town and packed my things as quickly as I could. As I drove away from that house for the last time, I felt a mixture of relief and lingering fear. Moving was the right choice, but the experience had left a lasting mark. The idea that someone had been watching me so closely, so obsessively, was haunting. Even in my new home, far from Alan's prying eyes, I found myself constantly checking the windows, scanning for hidden cameras, and feeling a chill whenever I thought I saw a shadow move outside. Alan was just a neighbor, a man who had seemed friendly and harmless at first. But beneath that facade was something darker, something that made me question everyone around me, wondering what secrets they might be hiding behind their smiles. Story 7. It started innocently enough, just a small annoyance that I shrugged off without much thought. My phone would ring late at night, always from an unknown number. At first I assumed it was some telemarketer who had managed to slip through my call filters, or perhaps someone dialing the wrong number. When I answered, there was nothing but silence on the other end. I would wait a few seconds, say hello a couple of times, and then hang up when no one responded. It was strange, but I didn't think much of it. The calls persisted, always at odd hours. They came just as I was settling into bed, my eyes heavy with sleep. It wasn't every night, but often enough that I began to dread the sound of my phone ringing. Each time, the same routine played out. My phone would light up, I would answer, and there would be nothing but silence on the other end. After a week of this, I decided to trace the number. I figured it couldn't hurt to know who or what was behind these calls. I used one of those online services that claim to trace unknown numbers, but when the results came back, they showed nothing. No name, no address, not even a location. It was as if the number didn't exist. That should have been my first clue that something was wrong, but I dismissed it as just another glitch in the system. The next night, the calls continued, but something had changed. Instead of the usual silence, I started hearing strange noises like breathing or faint whispers just before the line went dead. The first time it happened, I felt a chill run down my spine. The breathing was slow, deliberate, like someone was listening closely, waiting for something. I pulled the phone away from my ear, staring at the screen as if it would somehow reveal the identity of the caller. But it was just the same unknown number. I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me, even though I was alone in my apartment. I began to check the locks on my doors and windows every night, making sure they were secure. I even started keeping a small lamp on beside my bed, the soft glow comforting me in the darkness. But the calls continued, relentless and unsettling. A few days later, I told my friend Kate about what was happening. We were sitting in a coffee shop, the bustle of the city around us providing a stark contrast to the eerie silence of those late-night calls. "That's creepy," she said, her eyes wide. "Have you thought about changing your number?" "I have, but something's stopping me," I admitted, stirring my coffee absent-mindedly. "It's like, I need to know who's behind these calls. It's getting under my skin." Kate gave me a concerned look. "You should be careful. It might be some kind of prank, but it could also be something more serious." I nodded, but I wasn't sure what to do. I couldn't just ignore the calls, not when they were beginning to feel so personal. There was a growing unease in the pit of my stomach, a sense that something was very wrong. That night, I sat on the edge of my bed, my phone in hand, waiting. The clock ticked past midnight, and just as I was about to give up and go to sleep, it rang. My heart jumped in my chest as I saw the familiar unknown number flash on the screen. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "Hello," I said, my voice trembling slightly. For a few seconds, there was nothing, just the familiar silence. Then I heard it. The breathing. Slow, steady, and unnervingly close. It sent shivers down my spine, my body tensing as I strained to hear anything else. "Who is this?" I demanded, trying to keep my voice steady. "Why are you calling me?" The breathing continued, unchanging, as if my questions had no effect. I was about to hang up when I heard something else, a faint whisper, too quiet to make out. I pressed the phone closer to my ear, my heart pounding. "What did you say?" I whispered, fear and frustration mixing in my voice. There was a pause, and then the whisper came again, louder this time, clear enough for me to understand. It was my name. "Mika." The voice was low, almost a hiss, and it sounded so familiar, but I couldn't place it. My blood ran cold, and I dropped the phone as if it had burned me. The call ended abruptly, the screen going dark as the phone landed on the bed. I sat there, frozen in place, trying to process what had just happened. How did they know my name? I felt exposed, vulnerable, like someone had reached into my life and pulled out something deeply personal. I didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of the wind outside set my nerves on edge. I kept a lamp on, the light doing little to chase away the fear that had taken root in my mind. I tried to tell myself it was just a cruel prank, that someone was messing with me. But deep down, I knew there was more to it than that. The next day, I went to the police. I told them about the calls, the strange noises, and the voice that whispered my name. The officer I spoke to was polite but dismissive. He suggested that it was probably a prank or a glitch, and that I should block the number and change my phone number if it continued. But I couldn't shake the feeling that this was something more than a simple prank. I'd blocked the number as the officer suggested, but a part of me dreaded the silence that might follow. As unsettling as the calls were, the idea of not knowing who was behind them or why they were calling was somehow worse. That night, my phone didn't ring. I sat in bed, staring at the screen, half expecting it to light up with that unknown number.